All right. Good morning, good afternoon, etc., everybody. Um, Today I want to take you through something that's pretty exciting. Whether you are familiar with ARD or if you're familiar with what we've been doing with BlazeMeter scriptless for a while, or you're just kind of interested in functional testing, something that's coming out new in the latest version of ARD and is already supported in today's BlazeMeter, today's scriptless. And in particular, we're going to be integrating two very powerful testing tools to achieve something a little bit special. So I want to take you through that. There's quite a bit to go through. I'll take you through an agenda in just a second. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Depending on what they are, I might address them depending on what exactly we're doing already, but I'll probably address them at the end. One of the things I want to note ahead of time before we kind of get all the way through this is this webinar is also a blog. So whilst you can kind of go back and watch the recording if there's anything you didn't catch, or maybe I'm going a little bit quickly through the slides because of time pressure or something, but there's also going to be a written form of this. So if you end up having questions or you felt it went slightly too fast, you can always go and read the blog at your own leisure and eventually play with the feature itself. So without further ado, let me kind of explain a little bit about what we're going to be getting through. So we're going to talk a little bit about the overall goal. We're going to talk about how one of our testing tools that we're talking about today, BlazeMeter scriptless, works. So it's a scriptless testing tool. We'll talk about that in a minute. How does ARD or Agile Requirements Designer work? What does it do? And it being the other testing tool we're talking about today, how does it fit into this story that I'm going to be telling you? Why would we integrate them? How do we integrate them? And then I'm going to show you this all fitting together, right? So what are they both separately? What are they good at? Where might they be limited? How can they benefit from each other? Why would we consider having them talk to each other? What was being passed between them? And then how do we do that literally? And what does that look like from a workflow perspective? Like what kind of user flow do you end up with when you use both of these tools together, not just separately? And then finally, I'm going to demonstrate all of this together. So I'll be demonstrating, this is not a full scriptless demo. This is not a full ARD demo. I'm mostly going to be demonstrating just enough of them to kind of go through this integration. I'm not going to be, demonstrating either of them from scratch. So I'm going to try and give you enough context if you've never seen either of these tools before to understand what's going on. But this is not a full catalog of everything that scriptless can do or a full catalog of what ARD can do. It's going to be a summary, of the main reasons for them and a demonstration of how they integrate together to, basically give a smoother testing experience and a better quality journey. And then, of course, we'll summarize what we've seen, and then we will have a Q&A. So let's get started with what we're trying to achieve. So we have two different, in BlazeMeter, right? In BlazeMeter CT, we have a lot of different pieces of the puzzle, different kind of tools that help you with different things, from TDM that does data to mock services and SV and things like that. As you know, we've got performance testing. Today, I'm strictly talking about functional testing, and I'm talking about it in a GUI setting, right? There are things that we can do and talk about another time in terms of API testing with ARD and BlazeMeter together, but that's for another day. So today, we're talking about two different capabilities we have for automated GUI tests. And the goal today is to integrate those to basically give a better experience. So explaining what those two tools are. So one is the scriptless automation tool. So if you're familiar with scriptless automation, we have a tool like that in BlazeMeter. And what scriptless automation tools do and what ours does is it allows users who don't have coding experience to either capture by recording or otherwise build, automated GUI tests. So that might be dragging and dropping actions into a list to build a test. It might be going and recording things off a page or picking objects off a page. But essentially, we provide tooling to a user so that they can, build up a completely automated functional test without any coding experience, and then they can run that directly on the BlazeMeter platform. So you're running it with all our engines, and you can run those on either on-premise locations or in our cloud locations. So if you need to do it behind a firewall, you can. But essentially, it's a managed system where we'll manage the objects and things like that. I'll talk more about it in a little bit. But the key thing is it's a standard kind of scriptless tool built into BlazeMeter. There's a lot of good features it has with debugging and linking to the other things we do, like mock services and test data. But ultimately, its purpose is to allow people to build automated tests and record automated tests without needing coding knowledge. So that's the first tool we're talking about today. So yeah, it runs on the BlazeMeter platform. You can use different browsers, different mock services, different data. It's all integrated in. And when you run it, you get all of the results come back into BlazeMeter's central reporting, so it's easy to share with developers. The second tool we're talking about is a model-based testing tool called ARD, where we build models of systems or features or logic, and we use those to essentially automatically build all the different possible scenarios or test cases, or alternatively, the optimized set of test cases for some coverage goal, and we measure the coverage against the model. And we essentially use this tool to make sure that rather than designing test cases individually by hand, we have either all of the possible test cases or the optimal possible test cases for some logic that we depict essentially in what ends up being a flowchart, but it's a model of all of the different things that could happen in some feature. So it's a test design tool. So where scriptless is about letting you build individual automated tests, ARD in the model-based testing tool is all about you defining what can happen, and then it will define all of the different test cases and all of the assets that support those test cases automatically. And when you change the model, it will automatically change the test. So if you have like a big logical change, it's easy to kind of keep everything up to date. So both of these tools have pros and cons and drawbacks and things they're really good at and so forth, and suitability in different situations. We're going to get into all of that so you understand more how they can benefit from integrating with each other. But just to round this out, what we're really talking about is a test design tool that can generate automated tests, for any kind of target language. You typically need some kind of configuration. You have to set up your model, but it does give you all of the tests or an optimal set of tests, and you don't have to do that by hand. So as things get more complicated, it becomes much quicker than doing it, one by one or by hand. On the other side, with scriptless, you can basically just go to your application and start recording tests immediately. And you can go take manual tests that you already have and kind of get off them quite quickly. A lot more on that later on. The other thing I should mention about the test design tool is because you have a model of how something is supposed to work, it's actually quite easy to measure coverage and measure changes that happen, and also manage test data as well. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about scriptless, right? So you might be thinking kind of, hey, record and playback tool, I've seen those before. Totally true. We have a very rich feature set that supports it. I won't be going through everything today, but you'll certainly see a fair bit of it in the demonstration. And if you go and look up, in our blogs and our recorded webinars, BlazeMeter scriptless testing, you'll find very detailed webinars and blogs that go into, every feature that this has, the debugger and some of the smart, self-healing things that we have in here. But that's not the point today. What we're basically doing with scriptless at a high level is allowing users to either kind of drag and drop automated actions into a list to build out a test, or to go to a web page and basically start our recorder. This is just a Chrome extension, and capture all the different things that happen and bring those into a test. And if you bring in a recording, you can still add more actions. You can edit the data. You can parameterize it. You can debug it locally. You can upload CSVs. You can put in custom code. You can turn these things into, you can capture them into, reusable components and things like that. But ultimately what it's about is how quickly can I build some automated tests that I can replay, edit, and run centrally within BlazeMeter with all of the kind of bells and whistles of reporting. So whenever you do a recording, you'll save it back to BlazeMeter where you can edit them essentially as scriptless tests. Other people can collaborate with you. Any object that you touch, so here, I'm clicking something. What am I clicking? Well, I'm clicking an object called Departure City Dropdown, or I'm selecting from the Departure City Dropdown specifically the city Portland. So whenever you touch something in any of your recordings, or if you pick something with our object picker, we capture it as an object. This is going to be really important later, because later on, ARD is going to use these same objects. But just like any other kind of automation system, we need objects to know what we're clicking. But when you touch things in your recordings, all of those objects enter our repository, and they're automatically maintained, and they're linked to all of the tests, and you can go see their screenshots, who edited them and when, and you can maintain them all in one place rather than having to go to every single test. So if a drop-down changes in one place in your application, if the object changes, you can go edit that object, and it will change in every single test that uses it. You don't have to go edit it everywhere. And we do that automatically. So if you go and do a recording and you touch an object that you've already touched before, we already know about it in our system, we're actually going to automatically match those up and notice that you've done them before. We're not going to just keep creating new objects every time you go and record something. So when a user's building out a test, it's essentially kind of a drag and drop situation. You can also kind of encapsulate lots of actions, say like a login that you want to reuse over and over, as what we call a group. You might think of it as a component. So if I have 3 actions that I've built out and I want to basically turn them into a component, I just select them and I can basically say build component or publish as a group, and then I can go use that in other tests whenever I want. When I'm using a particular thing like, select, I'm just choosing my objects from, a drop down or a search box, and you can filter it. You can also go create a new object or edit the object that you're touching right there. So it's very easy for people to build out tests either by recording or by just, using the objects we already have and building them kind of in a drag and drop mechanism. Again, no coding experience required, although we do allow you to do custom code if it is necessary. So team members can quickly build and test, test cases that they're building. We do have a built-in debugger that, doesn't require you to, go through the whole, BlazeMeter reporting system and everything like that. It's very quick to kind of do some local debugging, essentially. You can run and schedule these tests. You can trigger them from an API. You can add them to suites. You can attach test data to them. You can even extract the reports over an API if you want as well. So if you want to put this in a pipeline, very easy. And again, everything is centrally maintained. So if you change one object or a component like login in one place, it will change in all of the tests automatically. And whenever you need to, either starting a test, reading from a test, or reading the results, you can do all of this over an API. But again, because it's all in BlazeMeter, it's easy to go and say, hey, developer, please look at this test, in particular, this result at this second, here's the video. And if you've ever seen a GUI test run in BlazeMeter, you'll know that you can actually send somebody a link to like 1 minute, 52 seconds into the video of one result of one test case if necessary. In fact, you can see that here. So for example, if my test is failing at this exact moment, I can literally get a link to this many seconds in, and I can send that straight to a developer, and they can get an instant sense of what's going on. So all the test results are in BlazeMeter. The debugging can be done locally. You don't have to kind of do it through the system. And the last thing I should say about this is that, you don't have to run the tests, in our kind of cloud locations, our cloud provided browsers and things like that. You can actually run it in on-premise locations. So if you need to conduct this testing behind a firewall, which is pretty typical, you can set that up as well. But all of the tests and the reports and everything can still be managed in our SaaS solution. So to summarize from the point of view of what can scriptless do for us depending on kind of where we are and how is this going to kind of compare out to ARD, scriptless is super easy to get started with and really quick. You literally go to a web page, you hit record, you start recording, and that test will be replayable instantly. If you want to go a little bit further and componentize things, that's straightforward. You want to build 1 or 2 extra tests, that's fine. If you have, say, 20 manual tests that you spend a lot of time executing, you don't have to really think about it. You can just go look at those manual tests, execute them as normal with the recorder on, and then suddenly they're automated. But later on, those objects are managed. You can start componentizing things, so it's a little bit better than just raw record and playback. And you can go and align data sets. So you can go and say, turn on our Blaze data capability and start, for your one test you had before, you can, push 100 different data scenarios through it. The other thing, which is an advantage from that point of view, is that you don't have to go set up web drivers or browsers or anything else to do this, right? This is all native execution in this managed platform. So you can basically go and register for a BlazeMeter account right now while we're doing the webinar, and you could use scriptless and easily be testing before I finish up. All of the objects, data browsers, and reports are all organized, and it's easy to kind of collaborate at a team level in a project in a workspace. It's easy to kind of share those around. Again, it's not stuck on one person's machine, and it's not, you don't have to kind of check things into some system in Git where you have non-developers using Git with developers at the same time and problems therefore that you go along with that. And of course, there's no requirement for coding knowledge. If you do have, some developers assisting the testing that's going on, there is facilities for doing custom code and, basically publishing that for other people to use. And the other thing is, if you have developers assisting your testing, if you free up some of this kind of testing and they don't have to do it, they can go and focus on deeper things, whether that's, API testing or performance testing or, much richer component testing or testing difficult to test things like Canvas components and things like that, right? So it's easy to maintain common items, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on the downside, whilst it's all very quick and easy to set up, any approach where an individual, and to be fair, this is 99% of testing that goes on in the world today. So this isn't a disadvantage for scriptless versus most testing, but when we compare it to what we're talking about a little bit later with model-based, you're still designing the test cases by hand, right? You might be recording them and they're automatically captured. You might be generating data automatically and pushing those through your tests. You might be dragging and dropping your tests, one at a time to build them out. But you've still personally or as a team come up with each of these tests, right? And you might have done that based on the manual set that you already had, or you might have done that, based on testing experience you've had for a long time. This is not always a bad thing. And like I said, compared to almost all testing, this is just kind of the rules of the game. As we'll find out a little bit later on when we get to model-based testing, this doesn't always have to be true. So there is a ceiling for most testing because, as a human, I can't go and design every possible test case. I can't go and, calculate some optimal sets given some set of rules. So there is going to be that. And whilst we can, easily work out how much of the web page we're touching and measure coverage from that perspective, if we have like a logical set of rules or a model that depicts some feature, we don't really know what combinations, we've definitely touched and which ones we haven't, in the same way that we would if we were doing model-based testing. There isn't an objective way of measuring logical coverage. You can measure coverage in terms of what you're touching on the page and data coverage and things like that. You can certainly measure, which user stories you're touching, simple kinds of coverage. When it gets that pure logical coverage, like, of all combinations of this feature, which ones am I touching, that you can't really calculate that without a model. The other thing is that, if something happens on your web page, for example, there's one more step required to log in, or the button to do some use case moves or its locator changes, you can go into scriptless, change that in one place, and it'll be fixed everywhere, no problem, right? Just like any kind of abstraction, if you have a page object model today, or anything that manages objects or actions, if things change like that, even if it's touching every test, it's very simple to maintain it if you componentize things right, if you've used objects correctly, right? But just like all testing today, except model-based testing, if you have a big logical change to your feature, for example, okay, I know before that the minimum was this, but now actually it's this, except where you call a manager, when you have these changes that would impact what tests you even design, which tests are even possible or valid, then you kind of have to go through every test like you would in any other testing platform, right? So you'd have to open up your 20 tests and figure out which new tests do I need when there's a logical change. Again, I'm not talking about an object on the page moving. I'm not talking about this one more step to, log in. I'm talking about when the functionality you're literally trying to prove is true has fundamentally altered. How do you deal with that? And in a model, there's a different way. So if we summarize the advantages and limitations, super quick, super easy, that you can get a lot of really good quality, and you can automate yourself extremely quickly in a collaborative way that's easy to maintain, and it's scalable, and it's in a managed platform, and you can link it to test data, mocks, all different browsers, really good reporting. So if you're going from poorly automated or manual to this, it's night and day. The only limitations that we're talking about here are things where you're much further along that quality gradient of, okay, I've done the decent testing, but now I want to prove this 100%. I want exhaustive tests, and you can do that with this, but you're going to start becoming slightly less efficient if you start designing 100 tests by hand. And that's not to say model-based testing is without disadvantage. We'll get to those in a second. So this is a model, okay, in ARD. This is an ARD model. If you've never seen ARD before, essentially what a model represents is all of the things that can happen and the things that we should observe when they do happen, right? So here, a user logs in, they go to the promotion page, they have a card type, it might be blue or red, or black, and if it is, their user type, if it's gold, and if their age, if they're an adult, we should expect the promotion to be displayed. And then the user is offered an action. They can apply the promotion, in which case we expect it to be applied. They can reject the promotion, in which case we expect it to no longer be listed. Or they can, log out altogether, and then it should still be listed when they log back in. So depending on their card type, their user type, if they've been a preferred customer for a decade, and their age, we have different expectations about whether or not we see a promotion. And depending on whether we see a promotion, there are different things a user can do, and depending on what they do, there's different things we should observe. So every pathway, right, every pathway that you might think of through this model, through this flowchart, represents things we know about the user, things the user does, and things we expect to happen, right? And it doesn't have to be a user. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a web page. It could be an API. But every pathway, I don't know if you guys can see my blue ink here, every possible pathway you draw through a model like this, right, represents one possible test case. I happen to know, just as a matter of experience, that this model here has 120 possible test cases, right? So it comes the question of, okay, I could generate all possible test cases, and maybe if I can have it generate me the automation and the data to match that, that's super helpful. But maybe I can optimize that. Maybe I can get 100% coverage of this logic without having to have all possible test cases. And when you start getting to numbers of possible test cases in the thousands or trillions, you definitely want to, have a smart algorithm that is picking test cases to maximize the coverage, with the minimum number of tests. And that's exactly what model-based testing is about. The other key thing about model-based testing is that you never really care about an individual asset, right? You're not interested in, one test case that has come from this or one piece of automation. You don't maintain those directly. You maintain this model. So if something changes, for example, in this case, right, if instead of, gold being, something where we show the promotion, if gold now means we don't show the promotion, what does that imply for all of the test cases I might have already generated? Well, a model can calculate that for you and generate all of the new tests you need and remove all of the old tests you don't need based on that change automatically, and then push out all of the new automation automatically to match as well. So in a model-based testing world, you have the disadvantage of, okay, I need to work out the model and I have to set it up, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. But on the other hand, you basically will always derive everything from the model automatically. So as things become more complicated or they change more frequently, or you need a higher assurance of quality and you need to either test everything or have provable coverage of everything, it becomes very, very advantageous, and certainly a lot quicker than doing it by hand. I might be able to build a model like this, with experience in, an hour and a half or something. And like I said, it can put out 120 automated tests that I don't have to maintain. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the key, let me just turn off the pen. And so the key thing to understand about this from today's perspective is, with model-based testing, we can generate optimal tests. It could be for the GUI like we're doing today, or it could be API or other technologies. We can generate automation scripts for any particular target language and other assets like data. But, because it can be for any language, we often have to provide like a configuration, a one-time, setup thing. And, that's not built in, and then I have to have someone else running the scripts. If we could get BlazeMeter and Scriptless to run these instead, we could have it more built in, and that's exactly what we're going to do a bit later. Now, again, whenever something changes, we can do automatic impact analysis. We can automatically measure the coverage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because we have a basis of a unambiguous statement of how something is supposed to work. And we know all of the test cases that we have. And so it's very, very simple to measure what combinations of things have we covered and what have we not covered, right? We can also make it easy to link to requirement. We can also automatically generate all of these assets, but also things like requirement traceability matrices and things like that. But the thing is, models require building, and they require a bit of thinking. You can't just go and pick up your manual set of test cases and start recording like you can with Scriptless. If you're under pressure to do some testing, and you have to, do your manual tests first, you might find yourself with the time to model at the end, having executed a big manual set of tests. So just a little bit more about ARD. We have this kind of, to generate all of the different test cases like I have here, we have what we call the optimizer, and it generates the pathway, but also the step-based view of the test, and then need data, and all of that is always just derived from pieces of the model. We'll see more of that in the demo. And whatever set of test cases I can generate, and I can choose different options for how deep I want my testing to go, I can always go and generate my coverage report, and I can see, okay, for the first three measures of coverage, I'm at 100%, and this last one I'm only at 87%. Maybe I want to ask it to generate more test cases to bring this up to 100%. So we can always generate our optimized test cases. We can always measure our coverage very easily, and any changes to the model will always just basically be reflected as, hey, you need these new tests, and I'm taking away these tests because you don't need them anymore. And it will do that for you automatically, but it keeps you in the loop. So if we summarize ARD's advantages and limitations, and I know if you've never seen model-based testing before, that was probably a bit of a whirlwind. But essentially what it is a tool that, takes a representation of how something is supposed to work, and it uses that to generate all of the different scenarios. And, if you set it up, it will generate the automation and data and things like that as well. But it requires some setup. So let's talk about the advantages and limitations of ARD, just like before, right? Okay. Yeah, so does ARD have links to the test cases exported to BlazeMeter? Is one of the questions in the chat. I'll get to that later, but yes. All right, so ARD and model-based testing solutions in general are going to be bringing optimal and exhaustive tests. Whether you want it to be give me the minimum test to get a certain amount of coverage, or if you just want every single possible set of test cases, you can instantly generate those, and that can guarantee you quality at a level you'll never get in any other way. You can also have it produce the data and the automation that you need to support any kind of testing that goes along with these tests. Sometimes you'll have to add some configuration to make that happen. And that's one of the things that by integrating with Scriptless, we're going to entirely avoid, so we don't have to do that anymore. Whatever we generate, whatever set of test cases we generate, we can always completely objectively measure the logical coverage. And so we can make rational choices about trade-offs, right? Is it worth doubling the test to go from 90% coverage all the way to 100% coverage? That depends on where you are in the sprint, or where you are in your release cycle, or where you are in terms of your own trade-offs. The great thing about model-based testing is that you can make a different decision each time. This time I might just generate all of the tests for 100%, but next time I can just generate, the half the tests to get me 90. I don't have to worry that, hey, I've put that effort into building those tests and now those are kind of the tests I'm stuck with. With normal automation, you typically have to, execute a test enough times for it to have been worth it. But if your test is generated automatically, you can have it generate a test for one-time use. Again, we've already talked about change being automatically dealt with. And one thing I want to stress, right, in the medium and long run, for something that's complicated and logical enough and something where it's change, it's either change or you really care about the quality, this is going to be more efficient than not doing it this way. But the truth is that a lot of teams are either working on applications which are either older or they're not changing as frequently, or they're just stuck under a set of manual debt, meaning they never actually find the time to go and kind of slow down to speed up and build these models. So from a disadvantage, and you have to build up a certain skill level, and there is a certain amount of investment to build models, right? So I'm not saying building a model is as quick as turning on the recorder and quickly recording 5 tests and calling it a day. That's not going to be true, right? So let's think about the disadvantages, and this is mostly around speed, right? So you have to go and build your model. So there can be kind of an upfront delay, especially if you only needed a few simple automated tests. If I just have a regression set of 10 tests for this little area, it's not that important, it's not changing. There's no point building a model for that. I can just go record those and call it a day, right? And the other thing is that, there is some training you might want to do with ARD, and modeling is a skill you get better at over time. So again, in the the first couple models you build, you're going to be a bit slower. So there is that kind of upfront hit that you just absolutely don't have on a scriptless side where you're doing a recording. And the other thing is that, this level of quality and depth is not always required, particularly at first, right? If we want to think from like a shift left perspective, sometimes, maybe finding fewer bugs sooner is helpful. Eventually I want to find everything, right? But I don't want to, I don't want the first week of my release to not find anything at all because my tests aren't ready, right? Or now, of course, in your second release of the same feature, your model's already there, so you don't have to do anything to do your testing. Or maybe you'll just adapt to your model you already have, and then that's the same as rather than maintaining 30 tests, I move 1 hour in this instance. So you save loads of time in the long run, but again, if that level of quality isn't necessary, you might find that recording just a couple of manual tests you already have to be more efficient. So where does that leave us, right? We have, on the one hand, a kind of a universal solution, a model-based solution that will give us, a lot of flexibility in the long run, a lot of power, but I'm not necessarily ready to do that to begin with. And that's not going to maybe help me if I'm kind of under an existing manual rock. And also, if I don't have any automation framework to hook ARD into, like it produces scripts, but if I don't have any automation, framework that can run any scripts, right? I don't have one that I can have ARD use. I have to go and set one up, and I have to figure out browsers and everything like that. On the other hand, we have a scriptless solution, which, whilst limited in terms of, okay, you're still designing the test one by one, everything's managed, the browsers, the objects, all of that is taken care of, the componentization, and I can start really quickly. I can just start with some recordings, start with capturing some objects, get some really quick testing done, and instantly execute it on the platform. So the plan is, what if I could start here, just do some simple recordings, start running these tests, get some quality done, but then leverage the work I do here, the components I build, the objects I capture, all of that, and leverage it in my model, and then execute the tests coming from my model in BlazeMeter so I don't have to deal with any of that. Then I can kind of start here, and then when I'm ready, graduate the quality, but still have it be compatible and runnable in BlazeMeter with all the same reporting. And then ARD doesn't have to worry about managing the objects. I can go and edit an object in scriptless, and all of the tests that ARD has exported will change automatically as well. I can go and update how we log in one place in scriptless, and all of the test cases ARD has exported will automatically reflect that. If the logic of my application changes, I don't have to change anything in scriptless. I can alter my model and re-export and update my test cases, and everything will be runnable again without me having to delete tests and things like that by hand. So what does that look like, right? If we compare the advantages, we have a quick to start with, reducing manual testing versus slower to start, right? We have an efficiency ceiling that kind of can eventually hold us back, right? Once we've kind of, covered a lot of the, low hanging fruit, medium hanging fruit, we can't go on with the scriptless generate exhaustive tests. Whereas with ARD, we're automatically designing our tests. We can scale it up. We can have submodels. We can deal with all of the logical changes automatically and have exhaustive testing. We can have it generate us every possible test case if we want to, or, a computer optimized set of tests. On the left-hand side, we have built-in object management execution. On the right-hand side, we don't have that. We have to integrate with an outside tool that you might not already have set up. On the left-hand side, we don't have a way of measuring coverage. On the right-hand side, we have a model that's an objective measure of coverage and test optimization. So these are very complementary. So we're going to try and connect them now. And I'm hoping that once I show you how we're going to connect them in theory, that it will make sense in the demo I'm going to show you. So the plan is going to be this. So this is not just a plan for integrating. This is the plan for like an actual workflow of how somebody might approach going from manual testing all the way to model-based automated testing, but without kind of, slowing down. And, you don't necessarily have to go all the way every time you do this, but you have the option to, right? You can start with a bit of automation, and when you're ready, or if it's appropriate, you can graduate on and you reference that in your model. And then, obviously everything executes on BlazeMeter. So we're going to record some base tests with scriptless. This might be from your manual tests that you already have. This might be just from some brand new tests that you kind of think of when you're walking through your recording. When you do that, we're going to be capturing all of the different objects automatically. And as you kind of like start building some new tests, recording some, you'll start organizing some of the things into groups. Remember those components I talked about, reasonable things. So, you don't drag and drop all of the different steps of login every time. You just drag and drop login, right? So you have these components. You execute any of these tests, you'll find problems early, you can report them, share them with development really easily. And if you have any manual tests, you'll go and convert all of those. And anything changes at the object level or at the kind of component level, you can easily change it in one place and maintain that no problem. So that's our first step, which is basically what you'd be doing with scriptless anyway. The second step, which is optional when you consider it worth it, when you're no longer under the, the pummel of maintaining manual or executing manual tests, and you find yourself with a bit of free time based on the time you've saved with scriptless, and you want to upgrade the quality in a particular area, well, you've already captured all the groups. You've already captured all of the objects. That makes it a lot easier in ARD. Eventually, we're going to expand this. You can import all of the test cases as well to build the model quicker, although I'm not going to be showing that today. So over in ARD, we can go build a model of the feature areas that we actually need to test at a deeper level, for the same kind of areas that we're doing in scriptless. So they'll be using the same objects and everything else. We can leverage the existing objects and groups that you already captured and built and already being maintained. We'll basically log into BlazeMeter inside ARD, and we'll attach those to parts of our model. So I'm going to attach pieces of automation, and I'm going to attach that same scriptless language of click, type. So the same language that our testers are used to using over in scriptless is going to be available directly in ARD. So I'm not having to script anything. I'm not having to do anything different than exactly what I would normally do in scriptless. But instead of attaching to a test case, I'm attaching to a piece of a model. So remember in ARD, any pathway that goes through a piece of automation will use that piece of automation, even if there's like 80 paths that go through it. So we're going to attach these scriptless actions, these objects and these groups directly to our ARD model. And then suddenly it's automated. Every pathway through here picks up all of these scriptless actions for particular groups, and we can actually generate the optimal set of test cases just like normal, but these test cases will be available as scriptless tests for us. So whenever we need to, we can go and alter the model and automatically regenerate all the tests and everything like that. But when we're ready, we can actually go and export these paths directly to BlazeMeter as scriptless tests. So 100% compatible and 100% using the same language. So what we do is, just like one of these tests would run on BlazeMeter, now I can go and export 100 of those tests into the same platform, where I can execute those tests, run them with CI/CD, all that kind of stuff, generate the reports, all of that kind of good stuff, collaborate with development. And then I can also, just like normal, execute with any data, execute with different browsers or different mock services running and things like that, right? Again, you can always execute this on-premise or in the cloud. So to summarize, get some really good automation set up with scriptless. If you need to, or if you want to, when you're ready, you can graduate that quality to a model that references all of the same assets. So it's compatible and built faster, and all of those tests that you build here can seamlessly be exported to BlazeMeter without any configuration. So this is designed to be easy to use. Once you have a model, to basically, it's just like using scriptless normally, but then rather than doing it one by one, I can generate 100 tests all at once, or 1,000, and then I can export those and run it, and I can measure the coverage of them. We can do optimal tests, etc.
Okay, so now let's go and actually see how these two different tools connect together and see what that workflow feels like in real life. So we're going to start off in scriptless. We can do a couple recordings of a demo application, and then we're going to bring it over into ARD and start building out a model and associating everything, and then produce some tests that we can go run back in BlazeMeter. So let's go and start over on Digital Bank. So this is our demo application. And before I do anything else, I'm going to go start my recording. So in scriptless, what you typically do, and we'll call this webinar recording, is to go and record a test. You use our Chrome extension, you start a recording, and then you basically go and record your tests. So in this case, I'm just going to log in. And in particular today, we're going to be focusing on a part of this application, which is to do with starting new checkings accounts. So I'm going to check new checking. And what we're going to be testing today is the different options we can choose when we're picking a new checking account, and how they should affect whether or not we're able to create the account. So if our deposit amount is too low here, or we don't provide an account name, or we don't provide an account type or an ownership type, it's not going to let us progress. And if we hit reset, no matter what we put in here, it's going to wipe the slate clean and keep us on the same page. So there's a few different options here. There's some logic in here. Let's just go record a happy path. So we're going to go and select standard checking, individual account ownership. We'll call this Ben's account, and we're going to put in $1,000 to begin with, and then I'm going to hit submit. So as I've been doing this, BlazeMeter has actually been capturing all of the different actions, right? So in scriptless, we've captured 16 UI actions that I've done, and we've captured 3 actions that I've done in terms of requests behind the scenes. So actually, I can use the same recording to produce API and performance tests, but that's a story for another time. I'm actually going to pause my recording so I can go select this text here, and I'm going to go and add an assertion at the end of my test to say, hey, look, I should be on this page, and I know I'm on this page because this text here for you checking accounts is visible to me. If we had just been back on that other page, we wouldn't be able to see it. I also could have gone for confirmation or anything else like that. So if I stop my recording here, and for those of you who've seen scriptless before, this won't be news to you, and you can go and see much deeper scriptless demonstrations for all of the different features involved in that. But what I can do is I can take this recording, I can go and send it directly to BlazeMeter. So what we're going to do now is, rather than just playing back our recording, we're actually going to go and see all of the different actions that I took. So right now, we're inside BlazeMeter scriptless, and you can see all of the different things I did. And these are actually automated actions. So we're resizing the window to a specific size, which happens to be the size of my screen. We're going to the login page. We're clicking the username field. I'll talk more about these objects in a minute. We're typing into the password field the password. We're typing into the username, and then we're logging in. So this is scriptless, and this is the place where we can go and do recordings of tests like that, and we can just play them back if we wanted to right now. But I can also go and edit these tests without having to know any particular code. For example, if instead of putting in $1,000, I wanted to put in, say, $2,000, I can just edit it. Now, I can also, for all of these steps, we actually have on the left-hand side, you can see all of the different automated actions that you can do. So for example, if I wanted to go and put a click into my test, I can just drag and drop it into the right place. I don't have to build these tests by doing a recording. I could even start from scratch and just drag and drop these actions in here one by one. So if we go to this click option, you'll notice that it's actually saying that an object is required. You can't just click on the screen. What do you want to click, right? So if I have, whenever we do a recording, we're actually capturing the exact object that you clicked. Now, you'll notice these have really nice names. I have actually already done these recordings before, and I've renamed my objects. And whenever I go and record the same elements on the screen again, the scriptlers will actually automatically identify that and make sure that the same login button is the same object being used in all of my different tests automatically. So if I want to click something, I can either pick from the repository of objects that I already have available to me, different drop downs, logins, whatever it is that I've captured before, or I can even use our object picker here to go and pick something on another screen. So if we open another option of Chrome here, actually what I can do is with my object picker, I can go pick certain items off the screen and basically go and use that to build an object. We won't do that in this case. I'm just going to go and say pick a rival city dropdown. If I want to, in a particular test, I can always go and remove any particular thing. So in this test, we don't need that particular click. It wouldn't make sense. Now, once I have a test like this, whether I built it by dragging and dropping individual actions, I can do other things to make it go, to make it more organized and to keep everything up to date. So one of the things that I can do is I can actually go and take a number of these actions that I think are going to be a useful group or component. We call them groups. And I can actually go and turn them into a published component that other people can go and use in their tests. So for example, logging in is something that I'm going to use in a lot of my tests here. So I might just go and say, okay, we're going to go take the resizing the window, going to the web page, clicking the username field, the password field, and so on, and the login button. I'm going to go and do this and say, log in to digital bank. And if I want to, I can give it a longer description as well, but I'm just going to go with a name. And if I save this as a group action, I kind of have all of those actions are still available here, but I don't need to see them all of the time if it's not important to my test case. So I have this available, and I can use this when I'm creating a new test. I can use this in ARD later on. For example, if we're going to create a brand new test here, one of the things that I can do is rather than dragging and drop in, go to the web page, do this, do this, do this, I can just go and drag, log into the digital bank straight in here, and I have all of those actions instantaneously. I don't have to go and drag them all in one by one. Okay, so let's go back to the test we were on. One of the other things you can do with these scriptless tests, other than build them up, componentize them, and take care of these objects. If you look at these objects, you can actually go and see not only their name and all of the different identifiers that are being used for them, but their entire revision history. And if you want to go and edit them and manage them at like an even deeper level, I can go to my test action library and I can see all of the objects and all of the components that are built, and I can order them by when they were created or updated, who created them, how many tests they're using. For example, this login group right here is using 266 of my tests. If I edit it in this one place, all of those tests will instantly update. This object of selecting a new account type is using 352 of my tests. If we go and open it up, I can actually go and see a screenshot of the object. I can see all of the tests that it's used in. I can go and see who made it and when. And again, if I edit it here, it will edit in all of those tests automatically. I don't have to update it everywhere else. I can even do an object picker and stuff from here. So last thing before I kind of bring things into ARD is if we have one of these tests, one thing we can do before we actually go and run it is we can actually put it in local debug mode. and I can just go and hit run. And this will actually open a new page local to my machine, and it'll actually go and execute that test. All the while, if I put this to one side, you can see it's showing the progress in scriptlets. And if I wanted to, I can actually put in a breakpoint here and have it step through one step at a time. So if I was having any trouble with my test, I could actually go back and like replay it one step at a time and see the, what's going on the page on the left-hand side whilst I'm editing it here without having to kind of go through the whole BlazeMeter infrastructure and wait for the reports to come through and everything like that. So with everything passing here, I'm actually just going to go and kick off this test for real. So this is going to kick it off. And in BlazeMeter, when you run a test, you get all of these results, including an entire video showing you everything. Whilst that's happening, one other thing we can do is we can go back to Digital Bank, let's log out. We can actually go and record a negative test to make sure we get all of the different objects that we didn't use last time in our repository. So I might go and just go and record and say webinar negative recording. I'm going to do a recording here. Again, we're going to log in. That's not a surprise. And once we're logged in here, we're still going to go to checking and go new checking. I'm going to choose interest, joint. I'm going to give an account name, but this time I'm going to give it a deposit of, say, 12, which will be below the amount, and I go and hit reset. And I'll do the same thing again. So this is a slightly longer test. I'll hit with 12 and I'll hit submit. And at this point, I'll expect to see this error. So the initial deposit, et cetera, is too long. Or I can just go and assert that I can still see this text here, new checking account, because if we can still see this text, that means we're still on this page. So with this test properly recorded, we can go and send that over to BlazeMeter just like before. In the meantime, I suppose, we can go and have a look at the test that we just ran on the BlazeMeter platform. So this is the original happy path that we were talking about. And if we look through the video, we can see the entire test executing. And we can go and see all of the different parts of the test. Now, if something had gone wrong at this exact moment here, I can actually go and generate a link to this exact point, and I can go open Slack and send it to the particular developer who I know might need to fix this. So if you have an issue when any of these tests are running, whether they've come from ARD or come from, you built it by hand with scriptless, when it's in the BlazeMeter platform, it has a permanent URL. And in fact, you can send links down to the second when you want to go see the report of any particular test. So let's go look at that negative test then again. And you can see we've got basically the same layout. We could do the same thing and replace some of these with some of the group options. But the key thing is we've captured all of the objects. Now, again, if we have an object along the way, for example, here, which is clicking the object name, we might want to give it a better name than this default name that it's come up with. So if I want to do that, I can go and say something like, let's give it a name like new account field, for example, and we can just save it there. And now this object is given a proper name in the whole repository, and any test that uses that is updated. So before we move into ARD, it's a good idea to have all of your objects named very reasonably, because what we're going to do in ARD is we're going to use these objects in our model to help us build all of the tests that we want. So at this point, we've got our positive scenario, we've got our negative scenario, we're executing our tests, we're happy, we're getting some level of quality. I'll just stop this here. Depending on if I have a set of manual tests already, or if I just want to get some simple tests, I might keep going and recording more tests here, making sure everything works and so on. How far I go into that kind of depends on where I am in my quality life cycle. But when I'm ready to graduate from my building tests one at a time, what I can do is I can go over to ARD and we can decide to build a model of this logic here. So if we go to this new checking thing and think, what would it mean to build every possible test case for this, or a model of every possible test case? And we can always go and optimize it a little bit later on, okay? So let's go and do that. So we're going to go into ARD, and that's one I built earlier. We're going to build a new model first, and we're going to call it create new account. We won't build the entire model together. At some point, we're going to skip ahead, but I want you to get the general idea. Okay, so when you're building a model in ARD, my advice is always to focus on individual features and individual components. You can build things end to end later when you need to, but it's always better to start with something simple. So in this case, we want to make sure that all of the logic that is defined for new checking account is implemented correctly. So let's think of all the rules that we have here, right? We can choose a checking account type, or we can leave it empty. If we leave empty, we should expect it to fail. We can choose account ownership. If we leave it empty, we should expect it to fail. We can choose a name. As far as I know, there's no such thing as an invalid name, but there could be. There could also be a name that's already taken. I happen to know that taken names are acceptable, but we'll model that anyway in case the rules change in the future. And the same for deposit amounts. We have a clear boundary here, but we can also do things like, what if I put in something that's not a number, like an A or -1 or something like that. And then we have, reset and submit. And if we submit, something should happen. If we reset, it should just blank everything out. So we've got a pretty simple model to build. The thing for me that I always like to do is I like to use our accelerators. In particular, we have a rich text importer that makes this a little bit easier. But today I'm just going to go and do multi-output cases. So we're basically going to build a decision for each of these options, and it's going to be pretty straightforward. So the first one is going to be select checking account type, or we can just say account type. And each of these lines here becomes an option. So let's just say leaving it empty, which is the default, standard, and interest. Again, I'm just going to keep it simple. And then we're going to make a decision for account ownership. Again, so we can leave it empty, or it can be individual, or it can be joint. Okay, I'll start connecting things up in a minute. And we can also go and do the same thing for account name. And here I'm just going to go with empty, taken, valid. Taken being a name that we've used before, but is otherwise legitimate. As far as we know, taken names are actually acceptable in this case. And then for deposit amount, I'm just going to do some, classic testing on numbers. So we're going to do something which is like A or letters. We might do -1, we might do 0. I'm going to not bother with 0 this time. We might do 24, 25, and greater than 25, or we might say less than 25 for the first one. So doing, classic boundary value analysis, you can do it more complicated than this. Okay. And then we have, you might hit the submit button or the reset button. Okay, so I'm going to call that action. It's in user action. And we're going to say submit or reset. Okay. And what we're going to do now is we should have 2 expectations, right? We've either created an account or we haven't. You could say there's 3 expectations. We failed to create an account. We never tried to create an account because we hit reset and everything should be blank. Or we created an account successfully. I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to go created or didn't create. So created an account. And we'll put the expected results in here a little bit later. And then let's say didn't create an account. Now we'll put all of the things to make it more obvious what's going on in a minute. And then finally, what we really need to do is we need to make sure that we're logging in and going to the correct page. So let's just have a name for login. And then finally, before we hook everything up, we're just going to have something for go to new checking accounts page. Okay. All right. So now basically we can kind of just hook everything up. I won't go through all of this, but I will explain some of it. So all of this stuff at the beginning can just hook into the next item. And then, for example, it might be that, okay, if the account type is empty, we should expect not to create an account. If the deposit amount is too small, we should expect not to create the account, or if it's letters and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit of hooking this up. You can imagine how it all hooks together. And I'm going to skip ahead to one I made earlier in the interest of time. Okay. So in this model here, it's exactly the same. I've got my login, go to new checking accounts page, checking account tip. I didn't include the empty option here just for brevity, just to make this a bit simpler. And then for my account name and for my, let's move this back over here. For my account name, my deposit amount, and my action, I have all these decisions here. Now, it's notable that if I'm ever invalid in one of these options and I go to the clones, I won't explain that just here for now. And then I have my two results at the end, account not created and account created. So we log in, we go to the appropriate page, we fill out the form, and then we have an expectation that the account will be created or not based on the logic of the amount that we put in, the account ownership. And if I included empties in here, then you'd expect those to be on account not created as well. So I've actually simplified this. There could be even more tests than it was. And, we built this much model in about, 5 minutes. This took me about half an hour. The next step when we get to this model is, first of all, we can go look at the test cases that we have here before we even connect them up to BlazeMeter, right? So let's go and do that. So the first thing is, if I want to just delete what I've already got in here, let's just delete everything here. So the first thing, just like in normal ARD, I can always go and just generate every possible test case, okay? And in this case, there's 120 test cases. Now, remember, I simplified this. It actually could be more than that. Now, of course, with 120 test cases, I might actually have quite a bit of over-testing there. Of course, we do have 100% coverage in every case, but I could also go and optimize this. If I just wanted to get to this level of coverage, and if you want to learn more about ARD and coverage, you can Google that. I can always go and optimize it. So instead of choosing all possible paths, I choose one of the optimizations, and ARD says, okay, well, I can do that in 22 test cases, actually. And if we go and measure those, we can see, hey, we've locked off a lot of the over-testing, and we're still at 100% coverage. So for each test case through here, we now have to basically explain to it, okay, how do I link this to that scriptless stuff that I was doing earlier? So what I've done is I'm just going to actually unlink this workspace so you guys can see me do it here. So when you have a model in ARD, you can link it to a BlazeMeter workspace. So if I choose one of the accounts that I have available to me, for example, I have a scriptless account and I have my workspace here, BJW, and I link it. Now this model is linked to that workspace. It can only be linked to one workspace at a time because you can only be part of one object repository. You can only use, one set of the components. So once we're part of a workspace, I can actually go to these blocks and I can start assigning different pieces of automation to them. So ignore what I already have here, and we're going to go add it back in. So for each of these items, you'll see that I still have the exact same actions and groups that I have available over in BlazeMeter. So every action and every group that you built in BlazeMeter, whenever you build a component, whenever you record an object, that's actually available in ARD. So the key difference, though, is that when I pull a group or an action over into the palette in here, this applies to one test. When I pull a group or an action over here into this box, it applies to every single test that goes through here. That could be easily 120 tests or 22 or however many it is. I don't have to know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to groups and we're going to choose log into the digital bank. And we've got our actions that we use there. And I don't have to even know how that's implemented. And in fact, if somebody comes and changes that group, right? If somebody goes and changes log into the digital bank, that's okay. If this needs to be updated over time, that's fine. My ARD models and all the tests coming from here will deal with that automatically. I don't have to change anything here. So on go to a new checking account page, I do a similar thing. We open it up and we'll just remove what's here. And I go click two things. So I'm going to go click. And the first thing we're going to go and click is we're going to go look for the object that we had earlier. So we had new account, new checking account menu item. So this is one of the menu items that we recorded in our testing. And so we're going to go click that. And then we're going to go and click checking accounts menu item. I actually have these in the wrong order. So all I'm going to do is quickly just reorder these steps. And now it's perfect. So it's going to click on checking accounts and then new checking account. And it's going to do that in every single test because every test goes through here. Now, in some of these other things, I can click on different things for each arrow. So for example, in this decision, on this arrow, I'm clicking the count type interest checking radio button. On this one, I'm clicking the standard checking radio button. Pretty simple. So different tests receive different actions. For deposit amount, I'm doing the same action for each of these, but I'm sending a different value. So I'm typing into the opening balance input. Remember that opening balance bit in Digital Bank that we had earlier? So this part here. I'm sending -1 when the output is -1. I'm sending 25 when it's 25. And if you're familiar with ARD, how it can do random data, we could have done that, but I left that out for now. And when it's less than 25, I'm sending 24. Again, it could have been a random number. And when it's greater than 25, I'm sending 4,000. And when it's empty, I'm leaving it empty. So we're always putting something in here, but it's different depending on which arrow we went down. And then finally, we either click submit or reset, and then I can have a different assertion in account created. So I'm asserting that the checking account number label has this text that I was looking for, or alternatively, I'm asserting something else, which in this case is the new checking label has select checking account type still is, and we haven't progressed from that page. So the point being, right, without having to configure anything or open a configuration, we can very easily just choose what automation applies to each block or to each arrow just by picking it from a list and then typing out our groups in here and searching for them, our objects, or just picking groups that we use over and over. And if these objects are maintained on BlazeMeter and Scriptless, ARD doesn't even have to understand or know about that. So you don't have to trade configs, you don't have to already have an automation framework, and it's very easy, and you can start just by starting in Scriptless and then graduating to this when you're ready. Now, where this leaves us is every pathway through here can pick up all of those different automation actions, and it can be turned into a scriptless test that can run on BlazeMeter. So if we go and take, say, either those 120 tests that we had earlier, or just to save a bit of time, these 22 tests, I can actually go and store all of these just locally for now, and then I can export them to BlazeMeter. And by the way, if I already have these tests in a project, for example, in the Digital Bank project, it would offer to update them for me. So if you wanted to just go and add an additional action in here, you can go and easily do that and update them all. You don't have to keep deleting them in BlazeMeter. I can also go and export them with a suite. So I can export these 22 tests as my create account webinar suite. And ARD will give me a notification that its export has started here. So in a minute or two, I should get a notification that that's all finished. In the meantime, let me show you what I did earlier. So here is a suite called My New Test Suite, which has, surprisingly, the same 22 test cases I had before. And each one of these test cases looks exactly like one of the tests that we recorded with a little bit more information, but it's essentially the same. Let's go and have a look at one of these in a second. You'll notice that my test has my login component, and then the rest of my test is split into these scenario sections, like checking account type, go to the checking account page, that directly correspond to the block that they came from. So we have, login, go to the new account page, checking account page. So if anything ever breaks, say we run it in debug mode, I can go and figure out which block it came from extremely easily. The other thing is that you'll notice I have all of my different actions in here. And again, I could run this just in debug. I could run this fully, or I can run this as part of the entire suite in one go. And in fact, that's what I did earlier. When you run the entire suite, you get a test report for the entire suite, all 22 tests, and you can see they're all passed here. If I want to, I can dig into one in particular. I can say, what about test number 20? And I can go look at its details, how long it took, when it ran, where it ran, etc. I can actually go and look at that exact same video that you saw before. So for every single test case that I'm generating off ARD, I still get all of these same benefits. And if I want to, I can always come back to ARD, and you see that actually it's just finished exporting our new suite. So let's go and have a look at that. Oh, let's go and refresh this. Okay. So let's just go refresh this page. So in ARD, I can always go back and tell ARD to do things like, give me every single test case that goes through this red pen, pull them to BlazeMeter, instantly run them. So we're really meshing the low code, very quick ROI, start quickly side of the world of scriptless, with BlazeMeter scriptless, and we're merging that with the power and the ability to come up with all the combinations with ARD and model-based testing. So if we go and look at, for example, the Create Account Webinar Suite, you'll see it's got all of those tests in it. And again, I could go hit run on this, and we won't wait for it to start and so on. But overall, what we have achieved here is we have actually been able to, if I just very quickly present this, we've been able to start with something simple, get the manual testing out of the way, maybe record tests we already had, get some simple quality going, and then we've upgraded to a model and being able to, if things change now, we'll be able to deal with it much more quickly. For example, say that taken suddenly becomes actually, taken account names are no longer legitimate. I can just move an arrow over here rather than dealing with it in BlazeMeter. And ARD is going to automatically evaluate that for me, right? So if I go look at those 22 tests that I had earlier, it says 7 of these tests are invalid. You have to delete all of those. And if I want to fix my coverage, all I have to do is ask it to do that for me, or say, I need to add these 12 test cases in. So in a matter of seconds, we have actually gone and deleted all of the invalid paths, added the new ones we need. And if I go and hit update to BlazeMeter, for example, and we choose digital bank, you'll notice that it's offering all of the tests that were available, that it already knew about. It's offering those as updates, and any of these new tests, it's going to offer it as create in a second when it works it out. So whenever something logically changes, I can go push this to BlazeMeter, and again, I can give it a test. So I can say, taken name remediation, or feature, right? If that feature change. So we can go deal with changes extremely quickly in a way that we never would be able to if we didn't have a model-based testing tool available to us. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully this has made it very clear how we can merge these two together.